So we are going to kick off this episode with the infamous New York Times quote of Warren Buffett from 20 years ago. And it goes something like this. Quote, "There's class warfare, all right, but it's my class, the rich class, that's making war, and we're winning." Unquote. In context, he was talking about how unfair the tax code was and how it was determined by the uber rich. That was a time when we thought the war was on the periphery of our collective consciousness, but now the class war is at the door, burning the house down. Hello and welcome to hello and welcome back to Colonial Outcasts, the anti-imperialist podcast that your ex-MAGA uncle turned Zionist Occupied Government theorist will at first hate, but might actually learn something from it if he sticks around to listen. He might learn something about his own class in opposition to the ruling class, the Epstein class, which he is not a part of. And why just pinning it all on Israel is a psyop they all want you to embrace. Israel has been happy to be the fall guy for U.S. empire for decades now. And we are going to be talking about the information operations surrounding the release of the Epstein Files, how this is a managed and timed release to uphold and preserve the political and economic structure of capitalism, and how the U.S. and Israel became symbiotically merged into one overriding architecture of extraction, exploitation, and violence. To that end, I'm your host, Greg Stoker, coming to you from the political dystopia of Texas. And I am joined today by fan favorite regular contributor Alina Xenofontos, coming to us from the Imperial Precinct of Cyprus. Because this is going to be a long, semi-freeform discussion about all this horrendous stuff I just mentioned. So how are we doing on this day of our Lord and Savior, Peter Thiel of Palantir?
Oh yeah, it's good times. Crazy times. And also, I gotta say, I love the upgrade of the uncle, the former MAGA uncle turned Zionist.
Everyone's going through a journey right now.
Everybody is. There's all these transformations taking place. So, we've got to do our part to help that uncle is just upgraded. Take him into the right direction, show him the light.
Yeah, because once you see Israel, there's two paths to go. Once you actually understand what's going on, you can go the far right Yahtzee conspiracy stuff, or you can actually go into the more correct ideology or framework that actually challenges power and isn't enslaved by it.
I completely agree. So let's go and save some uncles. I think that's what we should be doing today.
We are on a quest to save uncles. All right. So why, in your estimation,
my whole job?
Yeah, your whole. I mean, I guess this is kind of like the right time to be doing this episode.
It is. It absolutely is. I mean, we've all seen what's going on right now. I mean, since the Epstein Files have been coming out, there's so many different narratives that are flowing. There's also a bit of a misunderstanding as to what exactly was inside these files, what they really were. I mean, most of them were declassified anyway from the beginning. There's all this kind of conversations about why didn't the Democrats actually release the files to begin with? They would have indicted Trump. They would have won the elections. And there's a lot of cacophony right now. And so I think it's the most ideal time to just kind of break through that cacophony and save some uncles.
It's really just all theater for us peasants to be like absolutely confused and not really to know what to do with it. So we're also going to be talking about that. So y'all, let's get started. And for the audience, I'll be focused more on the information ops going around and the intelligence history surrounding all this BS. And Alina, who's done a lot of prep for this episode, is going to be handling the financial aspects and history of this giant shit show we less than affectionately call the U.S. empire. So with the revelations of the Epstein Files and the intelligence-linked human trafficking ring, Israel, I just want to remind everyone on the ZOG train, the Zionist Occupied Government theory, that the U.S. government and ruling elite have always been this way. Was child trafficking this organized since the abolition of slavery and the indigenous American boarding school system? It's kind of organized right now with ICE detentions. And I'm actually running for Congress in the district that has Hutto, the largest ICE detention facility for women and children in the country. So look, It looks different. It looks shocking, but it's always been this way. And a lot of people are undergoing a rapid political transformation / education. And when confronted by the shocking imperial history of the U.S., it's easier to just blame Zionist capture for things like the for-profit genocide in Palestine and say, this is not who we are. This is not what America is. But remember, I love this example because it's very apropos right now. In 1954, we overthrew the government of Guatemala, democratic government of Guatemala, installed a far-right military dictatorship under the guise of fighting communism, and militarily supported the genocide of nearly 200,000 indigenous Mayans, all for united fruit, for literal bananas, okay? And in the 70s and 80s, this is an important point, when the U.S. was more concerned with a soft power war against the Soviets and couldn't be seen to be funding and supporting those regimes that had historically done so, Israel, as it became more symbiotically merged as the dirty appendage of U.S. foreign policy, took over running the death squads in Guatemala. They were happy to be the ones also overtly advising and supporting the Sri Lankan government's genocide of the Tamils, and they don't give an F if they're the fall guy for the dirty work of the U.S. empire or capitalism in general. If any of this is shocking to you, perhaps it's because you believe that these types of colonial atrocities only existed in bygone history textbooks about like the British Raj or Weimar, Namibia. People were trafficked, slavery was abolished and replaced by the violence of the carceral state. All this kind of stuff has never gone away. It's just been repackaged. So as Epstein, an intelligence asset, was he an access agent being handled to run a transnational blackmail operation? I mean, that's kind of my operating assumption. And it was an easy one to run because the ruling elite have always been ensorcelled by acts of taboo and transgression. And my question is, this being a blackmail ring, so what? Like, does that change the overriding principles of U.S. capital extraction and unipolar global domination? What are we missing here? You know, firstly, the release of the files were timed, strategized, and managed. I'm going to just spend the next 1-2 minutes talking about the rollout. They were timed because they had to be incompletely released. Yes, incompletely, in order to pacify the American people and uphold the legal framework and architecture of the system as a whole. The release of the files was unavoidable, and what we received is a cynical compromise with the American people to uphold capitalism, baby. The files release was managed because they do little to expose who Epstein was associated with, including intelligence agencies. Ask yourself, for instance, why they chose to redact certain names of powerful associates while throwing dinosaurs like Larry Summers and Alan Dershowitz or clowns like Elon Musk under the bus. Why do we only have secondhand testimonies and redacted emails that you can't prosecute anybody on? Why are so many appendices missing? And why was Trump mentioned there more times than Jesus was in the Bible? They want you to focus on Trump, the orange-faced, mentally declining madman imperialist crapping his pants in the Oval Office, so that when the pendulum swings back around a Democratic administration, we can all breathe a sigh of relief that liberal democracy has been restored and we can keep funding ICE and pillaging the developing world just with more decorum. Thus, the two-party dictatorship will be upheld. In terms of conditioning, we should point out that Jeffrey Epstein personally funded right-wing media spheres, like a very intel thing to do for a random Wall Street guy. The founder of 4chan was a close friend. He funded alt-right podcasts and helped shape, amplify, and legitimize the hateful ideology behind the most extremist sects of the MAGA movement, and thereby discrediting, in the eyes of liberals, any legitimate complaint about child trafficking or the system as a whole. Crazy how the Democrats have never engaged with the files until now. The pendulum swings back and forth like this. It's also a big FU from the ruling class. The message, you know what we did. You have enough proof, which actually isn't proof, to validate your position, and you can't touch us. Your justice system is ours. Humiliation through revelation, kind of. And here's the current cycle of desensitizing the masses. So you'll have day one, scandal breaks, massive revelations, and outrage. By day 3, hashtags are trending. The conversation expands. At the end of the week 1, outrage peaks. There are demands for actions. By week 2 or 3, the news cycle turns over, perhaps strikes on Iran, and attention shifts. Month 2, it's kind of largely forgotten as a aspect of daily life as life moves on. And month 3 is normalization. This is just what they do now. There's nothing to be done about it. So the movers of power know that human attention span is limited, emotional energy depletes, new crises override old ones, and our justice system takes longer than outrage lasts, if it even works at all. This is called, obviously, psychological desensitization. Do you still have the energy, for instance, to get stuck in on the front lines of the Palestine movement right now? I was just on the flotilla and I'm struggling with it. I'm exhausted. Now we've moved on to the Epstein Files. Tomorrow will be something else. The only path forward is to connect all the issues and remain laser focused on class struggle, because they are. All right, this is only a single issue. So when Kamala Harris, who just announced a new run for 2028 president, says you can't afford to be a single issue voter, you are a single issue voter. There is only one issue, because they are. Here's Trump talking to Clinton from yesterday, because these dudes have solidarity.
That somebody's going after Bill Clinton. See, I like Bill Clinton. I still like Bill Clinton.
What do you like about him?
I liked his behavior toward me. I thought he got me. He understood me.
So basically, after demonizing Clinton, both Clintons, for years, he now has his back and pacifies his violent cult protecting him. Solidarity forever, I guess, within the ruling class. So I just kind of wanted to point out what's happening. If you are still talking about Democrats and Republicans in 2026, you really don't know what's going on in this world, because I think I didn't have time to read your article, Alina, but I assume it was talking about a lot of this.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of wrote and explained pretty much the same things whilst getting into it, obviously with a little bit more details and, referencing some of the kind of points that I was trying to make. But you've kind of obviously hit the nail on the head. A lot of people, I've seen a lot of the narrative that's kind of been dominating social media and political discourse, and as well in the way in that mainstream media is also framing it is, well, why didn't the Democrats obviously release the files? If the Democrats had released the files, Trump would have lost the election. And there's several issues with this. And I mean, you kind of tackled quite a few of them. The first thing is the ruling elite would not want these files to come to light in the first place. I mean, the idea would be in an ideal world, they would not want to, public. To make these files public, they would have liked this to go away, to be written out in the history books and put to aside. However, this is the thing: when you have a liberal democracy, which is the fuel that keeps capitalism afloat, that requires all these legal institutions and civil rights and political discourse, you're not going to be able to evade having to tackle, obviously, the Epstein files. And especially through the mechanism of electoralism, we saw Trump, which again is a liberal democratic process, we saw Trump constantly using the Epstein files, interestingly, to galvanize public support behind him in order to push forward, in order to guarantee that he was going to win the elections. But it also speaks volumes to the fact that the American people were very aware. It doesn't matter whether they're on the left or the right, but there was an awareness that there's obviously, there's an elite class behind the Epstein files, and they want a sense of transparency, and they want a sense of accountability. And so Trump was able to win the elections, and in doing so, he put himself in a sort of political trap where he had to reveal these files. So it got to a point, and I think it's what's really important to understand, because this is other aspect that's constantly argued, that being, oh, well, isn't it really interesting, the timing of these files? Listen, not really. It's not going to change the trajectory of Western imperialism. The goals with regards to Iran and Venezuela and Cuba, I mean, there's a lot going on now with Cuba as well. These things were going to happen regardless, especially when looking at the fact that the U.S. is a dying empire. As obviously it's collapsing on its own contradictions, and we're seeing the rise of a multipolar world, but also the rise of alternative powers in the form of China, who seems to have the upper hand fundamentally because of imperialism, interestingly, as being the primary contradiction. So it hasn't really done anything. It was something that was going to happen anyway. But what's interesting about the leaks, much like you said, is in the way that the revelations is how they actually happen. Like you said, first of all, these documents for the most part were already declassified anyway. These are not classified documents. And the vast majority of the information that has been disclosed is pretty much, it criminalizes Epstein, sure. I mean, he's been criminalized. However, all powerful actors, Trump included, like you said, none of them have actually been exposed. And even with regards to Trump, the documents that were revealed were secondhand testimonies. From a legal perspective, if you don't have hard material evidence to back and corroborate that those particular testimonies, these documents mean absolutely nothing. This is not to say, and this is what the important thing is, this is not to say that this evidence doesn't exist. It most likely obviously does, but those are the documents, and that's the evidence that is not being given to the people, and that is why you can't indict them. So going back to why the Democrats decided to obviously not expose the files, well, like I said, firstly, ideally you would not want to, but secondly, and this is the other aspect behind it, if you were to reveal the files and actually try to indict Trump, like a lot of even liberal pages are constantly advocating for, like, why didn't they indict Trump with information that he had, is that you would actually have to present and publicize incriminating evidence. And that incriminating evidence wouldn't just be incriminating to Trump, but it would be to probably a plethora, like a network of the elites and the capitalists, behind, and a huge portion of the capitalists and the system itself. And we cannot have that.
No,
so
absolutely not.
Yeah.
Like if you actually had to go through that process, you'd have one subpoena. That subpoena would explode into like 15 others, which would explode into like, this would go on years and years and years. And what it would do year after year, revelation after revelation, it would continue to drive home the fact that there is one group of people controlling us and there's the rest of us peasants. And it would be a circus of like creating class consciousness, which they literally can't have.
Exactly. You don't want to create the sort of conditions by which to generate class consciousness within a society. So what they decided to do, rather than obviously expose the files, since Trump obviously galvanized the public and came to power on the lines of that, they realized that they had to make certain compromises. And the ruling class historically has always had to make compromises in the form of welfare state, appeasing trade unions. We've seen this happen repeatedly over the decades. We'll give you some compromises, whether it's labor law, rights, etc., so as to appease the masses. And that always dilutes revolutionary incentive and revolutionary praxis, because if you don't give those concessions, people become all the more agitated. So by providing, they understood that this was a necessary concession in order to uphold the power structures. And they did so by realizing that they would have to define what's going to be released, to what extent, what kind of information, how incriminating it will be, and whom they're going to target. And this was the very interesting aspect behind it. So we saw a bunch of like documents come out, again, like we said, focusing on Epstein, protecting powerful names, but also targeting Trump. Even though there were secondhand testimonies that, again, are not really incriminating per se, because there's a far higher threshold in criminal law in order to actually indict Trump. But it does create a sort of diagesis now around Trump. There's a sort of character, a sort of focus on Trump's character and his particular political position. And this was a very targeted operation, because what this does is that it goes back into, I guess, blaming all the chaos right now in the United States, as well as what's happening around the world, as well as what's happening, whether this be Iran, Venezuela. This is creating a personality blame on Trump and his administration. See, they are the radicals. They're crazy. They're insane. If you want a rational actor, you have to look towards the Democrats, and it sustains that two-party, like you said, the two-party dictatorship, or like the illusion that there is an opposition, the lesser evil that is more controlled. Yeah.
And so, like, if you look at it, if you look at all the Democrats, establishment Dems and national security Dems criticism of Trump, it's always on issues of like decorum. He is the unabashed, blazing face of unchecked imperialism, and they're fine with it. When we were striking boats, when Southcom was striking random boats off the coast of Venezuela, what was the Democrat response? For Senator Mark Kelly and some other NatSec Dems to make a video about all they said was make sure you're following legal orders. Great. Thanks, guys. That's stuff I was taught week 1 of basic training. You did not need to make that video. There was no criticizing like, oh, maybe we shouldn't be intervening in Venezuela and overthrowing their government or trying to do regime change. They're not pushing back against Iran. They're just letting it happen. Like, see how it pans out. If it's a disaster, they'll come on and try to pin it all on Trump. And if it works, they'll just remain silent about it and continue to hit Trump on these like personal flaw issues. So
exactly. It's the same thing is even happening with the ICE argument. I mean, like we've seen before, the ICE was a creation as a bipartisan creation, and actually became professionalized, and it became pretty much a paramilitary group. And its entire legal structure was essentially set up by the Obama administration, which basically set the stage for Trump and continued throughout Biden. And obviously, we're seeing how it's escalated again under Trump. And when you're seeing, the sort of criticisms that are coming from the Democratic Party with regards to ICE, it's just more so, well, they need more training, and maybe questions as to the funding. Maybe their funding shouldn't be as high. We're not.
I don't think you've seen Chuck Schumer's statement today.
Oh no, I probably haven't.
Oh, it's not good.
That.
Okay, so just to put this home, and I like talking about this because it's really important. Chuck Schumer posts. This was a day ago, I think, actually. Senate and House Democrats are united on reining in the abuses of ICE. Americans have watched in horror as ICE has terrorized communities across the country. This is true. I just got back from Minneapolis. Federal agents can't continue to cause chaos in our cities while more Americans are killed. We must rein in ICE. Here's what we're demanding. Targeted enforcement, no masks. Actually, Chuck Schumer was on the Hill today, and he said masks could be permissible in counterterrorism operations, require ID, protect sensitive locations, stop racial profiling. That's never going to happen. Uphold use of force standards, body cams for accountability, not tracking. Okay, first of all, this is the entirety of it. They want a more polite ICE, but it is a completely extra legal, unaccountable organization. So for you to ask them to follow the law is insane. And they're not actually demanding anything that will change anything materially because they don't want it to be changed. We know that body cams, we've had over a decade of research on this, do not do anything to reduce police violence. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I mean, one of the biggest issues with ICE, one of the biggest issues is that they're allowed to execute warrantless raids, which is violation of the Constitution. That isn't even being addressed. Like, I mean, they don't even need to actually have, warrants from any sort of judicial figure. They're able to just essentially break into people's homes, take whoever it is without any form of accountability. This is a direct violation of the Constitution of the United States. I say this as a non-American, as someone who hasn't even been to the United States, but understands to a certain degree the legal structure and the legal obligations. I mean, a lot of the the points that he's outlined there are really not going to change the way or the structure and the way that ICE actually operates. This is artificial, and it goes back to the previous point that I'm trying to make. The Democrats are exactly the same as the Republicans in every single way and capacity. But the reality of the situation is that much like you said, Trump represents the raw capitalist imperialist face, the raw capitalist face of imperialism in its most, absolute manner. Whereas the Democratic Party represents, I guess, the bourgeois political etiquette of capital that prettifies capitalism and tries to make it appear somewhat more acceptable to the masses. And this is part of the political spectacle and the sort of dynamics that are at play consistently within liberal democracies in order to give people the illusion that they have some sort of choice in the system that oppresses them, that it's defined by their own will, when in actuality it's not. They're being it's a form of psychological kind of operations that work towards influencing and pacifying a population. And I've actually argued, I think in one of our older episodes from last year, that I actually believe that Trump was probably the desired candidate to win the presidential elections, fundamentally because you needed this aggressive foreign policy and internal policy in the United States, given the crisis that capitalism is in. Because every time historically we have seen sort of a rupture in the system, we've always seen these sort of far right figures, or just these, figures like Hitler, for example, or Trump, who are sort of even pushed into power in order to execute these foreign policy or internal policy objectives that work to preserve imperialism. And then when they're discarded of, and Trump will be discarded of, and we're seeing how he's essentially now being targeted, he's going to be thrown under the bus for all of the events that are happening, again, like I said, around the world and within the United States. The Democratic Party and the centrists and the common sense folk of capitalism are going to sort of take the reins and say, like, okay, we'll see, we've disposed of the problem, but secretly, just like Biden did after Trump, they're going to continue the same policies. I mean, for example, during the Trump's first administration, I'll just say this very quickly, there was chaos because he had brought down corporation tax to like to 21%, and it was chaotic. And the Democrats were obviously critiquing it. But then what happened when Biden actually came into power himself? Did he change that? No, he didn't. He said most of the policies that actually Trump had put forward in his first campaign were pretty much continued under the Democrats, but it was done in a different way. So he said he will set the stage and put into motion the engines of imperialism in Venezuela, in Ukraine, Europe, Greenland, you name it, Iran, and when the Democrats do come into power by galvanizing on this idea that they're selling right now, even through the Epstein Files, that the problem is Trump and his administration, they would simply continue the same policies. Because at the end of the day, the system itself is, you made a point earlier about how to blame Israel, and I actually will get into that in a second, but to blame Israel about I'll get into that in a second, but like to blame Israel for the fact, for the actions of the United States, when the United States was funded out of in genocide itself. It was funded, it was created, it was built up off the back of genocide, of ethnic cleansing, of this is the history of the United States. And in fact, we even know that even Nazi Germany kind of incorporated a lot of these practices from the United States. So actually, it's not the other way around. This is the history way before Zionism, way before Israel existed. This is the history of the United States. Unfortunately, it's the reality of the situation. And so it's important to remember these things, and all the wars that and regime changes around the world that the United States and its intelligence apparatus has engaged in order to preserve its own power so far as is possible. I think it's important to remember that. And we're going to get into now Israel and all that.
I just want to make one more point on the to kind of expand on yours, or like make it a little bit more simple for folks. Reform politics is an illusion. Back in the day, remember in 2003, when people were, upset about something, you'd actually have to try and pass legislation, to kind of do some sort of reform, to act as a pressure valve to assuage the masses and make you think that the Democrats were back and that they're going to pass more progressive policies. But just like in 2003, we had to lie about the axis of terror and, making sure Iraq had democracy and Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. We're now at a place where we don't even have to do that anymore. And we're not doing it. We're just like, yeah, we're going to Venezuela. We're going to get the oil. And now we don't have to actually promise any legislation. We don't have to make any campaign promises. Harris won't. Gavin Newsom won't when running for 2028 presidential election. They're just going to be like, yeah, we're not Trump. We're not going to do anything materially different, but we're not Trump. You can go back to brunch. He's going to stop doing crazy things that make you feel crazy and emotionally exhausted. Just go back to sleep. It's a pressure valve. To this point, they're organizing the Democratic Party and some nonprofits are organizing another national No Kings protest in 2 months. All right, because we need another protest in 2 months. That's really gonna turn this whole franchise around. I would like to remind you that a lot of the last ad sponsoring and a lot of the massive sponsorship came from liberal billionaires, to include the Walton heiress, the Walmart heiress, whose legacy is infamous for union busting, engaging in managerial surveillance, and everything like that. So this all goes back to class too. This is a theater. This is like bread and circuses stuff for us, and we can't afford to be tricked by it anymore. So before we go into Israel, I would like to just real quick talk about how we've always been doing this, and it might be instrumental to talk about the origins of the Central Intelligence Agency, how it was built over kind of the framework of the Office of Strategic Services. Alan Dulles, who was the first director of the CIA, he and his brother, who eventually became the Secretary of State, they were two of the biggest Wall Street lawyers around. And while he was working for the Allies and the Office of Strategic Services in Switzerland, he was, doing intelligence operations on behalf of the U.S. government and military, while also defending his Nazi banker clients' interests back home on Wall Street. there has never been any daylight, because it's fascism. And so they've always, and under his guidance, they always supported anti-communist fascist regimes in support of Wall Street. So that is the origin of the CIA and the US's secret government. All right. And the early CIA people, they weren't from the ranks of the citizenry like they are now. They all went to Harvard, Yale, Columbia. They were in secret societies. They got recruited out of sports and these societies, and they all knew each other. They all went to the same boarding schools. There's no conspiracy. There's no deep state conspiracy. It's just capitalism. They all knew where their interests lay and their family's interests. So my son's in the CIA. He's the policy director for South America. Well, we got these corporate interests that my family is invested in, and my father sits on the board. So when people talk about the Zionist Occupied Government conspiracy, it's not a conspiracy. This is just elites knowing where all of their interests lie. And it's been like this since the since the post-World War II rise to global power that the U.S. experienced. So that started even before Israel was a state. Okay. And all these violent institutions, all these legal institutions that our current law is built off of from the 1800s and late 1700s, they existed before Zionism even existed. So just the most basic principles, it doesn't make sense. And I think Alina has got some stats and some figures that she can go into more depth about it.
No, I will, but I actually just want to continue off of what you've just said. I mean, it's such an important point. I mean, okay, obviously we know that Zionism was an ideology that initiated in the late 1800s, 1900s, etc. But going back to, again, international law, how international law works and how it has been defined, this predates Zionism. The current international legal system predates the very existence of Israel. And the entire basis of it was premised on, securing the colonial interests of former colonial powers over the decolonized new states. The entire purpose of international law was to establish this international, I keep saying this over and over again, but it was to establish this international standard by which to pay back, compensation to, the private capital, whether it was in Europe or the United States, so that they could preserve their interests when countries that were formerly colonized were establishing their own states and wanted to nationalize their own resources and to take their own wealth to improve their own economies. International law was always there to protect the interests of capital over that of people. And this is irrelevant as to whether Israel existed or not. And as we'll discuss going forward in this conversation, is that whatever happens with Israel, if Israel ceased to exist tomorrow, and I'll explain this as I go forward, obviously, there will be another far-right ideology or another, that the West will push, or that the capitalists will push in order to continue to sustain the system. Again, Hitler played his own role in that in order to preserve, the interests of capital. And we'll even see how that worked how it actually benefited American banks and financiers incredibly. So, it's a bit ridiculous. And I think going back to the files, one of the biggest problems that I've seen beyond obviously this, the continuation of this narrative that there is opposition in liberal democracies and electoralism and which is paramount to sustaining the system itself. The other, Israel is also being treated in the same way that Trump is. Whereas all sort of the way that the narrative has been approached is that Israel is pretty much the defining factor here, that they, because Epstein was a honeypot, which he most likely was. This goes without saying. Obviously, he had intelligence connections, or he was a Mossad agent himself for Israel. However, to try to claim, and this is the problem, that Israel defines and dictates U.S. policy, is to fundamentally protect the system itself that creates and generates this barbarism that we're seeing coming out of the Epstein Files, but also a genocide, war, regime change, and mass exploitation around the world, by not focusing on the system, but Israel alone. And this is one of the most dangerous aspects. And I think, again, this was part of the targeted operation of how they chose to leak these files in the first place. Again, protecting powerful actors, protecting Epstein's elite networks, because that would incriminate the system. And there's an entire field of this, even in criminology, when we're talking about white collar crime, and how that operates, and how capitalism is crime facilitative. It creates the perfect breeding ground for actors like Epstein to actually exist. And I don't know if you want to say something before I get into it, but I was gonna
there's a lot of people getting into this politically, and we're throwing a lot at some of y'all right now. I just want to say just the most basic point: if Israel were to stop existing tomorrow, we would just move our base of power in West Asia to Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. And we're already doing that because Israel ain't doing imperialism for us like it used to. It's kind of been tarnished and weakened, and that's why we're investing so much in Saudi Arabia. And we got them because like 3 years ago, we were kind of watching Saudi Arabia ride the fence. It's like, do I want to do the multipolar world order thing, or do I want to like play both sides, or do I want to go straight, try to fold myself as a sub-imperial state into Western unipolar power? And they chose. So they're our backup plan in the region. So even if Israel didn't exist, it would not materially or performatively change anything going on.
Oh no, I completely agree. And one way to understand that as well is to also understand the way by which, because whether Epstein has done what he has done, I mean, when we know he's done what he's done,
yeah,
it's important to contextualize as well, and this is very important, what human trafficking, sex trafficking means, and how it actually facilitates the capitalist system. So yes, he himself might have been, most likely was a honeypot. He was an intelligence agent, and he was obviously collecting data and information. That goes without question. The reality of the matter is that these situations, people like Epstein exist because capitalism facilitates and creates the perfect conditions for that. And in fact, it requires it in order to safeguard capitalism, especially as well in times of crisis. But most importantly, in the case of the United States, in order to sustain finance capital. And so I actually have a couple of statistics here and points that I did want to cover, because it's very important to understand this. So where to begin? One of the things that
maybe just for some in the audience, we should define finance capitalism. So I'm just going to give a as opposed to industrial capitalism or something like that. So basically, guys, finance capitalism is the bad one. Well, it's all bad, but it's the really bad one that comes at the end. It's kind of like the beginning of the ending and the death. So finance capitalism is a stage of capitalism where economic and political power is dominated by financial institutions, banks, and investors rather than manufacturers. It emphasizes profit maximization through trading financial products like stocks, derivatives, and bonds, lending at interest, and rent extraction rather than industrial production. So before Elena goes into it, just know we're not making anything. There's no product. They're not producing anything. And that's why it's kind of like a house of cards. That's why everyone's concerned about the AI bubble. So, okay, that's just the most basic definition, y'all. So please continue.
Yeah, it's about creating artificial wealth, essentially. It's all based on speculation. And it's pretty much it's like a Ponzi scheme. You're putting money into something with the idea that it's going to bring some sort of future value. Future value is calculated to that. And obviously debt, the fire sector, finance, real estate, insurance, all of these aspects, the stock market bubble, all of this falls into the scope of finance capital. Whereas opposed to an industrial-based economy, it actually, like you said, it produces things, it produces goods, it produces tangible assets, and actually helps, an economy develop and grow in a real way, as opposed to artificially, which is what the United States has. And it tends to happen. Finance capital came into to the United States as a consequence of the fact that within basic economics, we understand, and I've said this before, not even just in a Marxian sort of way of thinking, but even by classic economists like David Ricardo, for example, there is a tendency of rate of profit to fall within industrial, even within industrial capitalist economy over time, and this brings about a capital accumulation crisis and an overproduction crisis as it goes forward. So you need to find new avenues to create profit maximization in an economy where profit becomes the primary engine. And this is where banks got involved. And we saw in the United States, a lot of that wealth was extracted outward. And this is how, imperialism began to take shape in order to exploit cheaper labor, and, economic discrepancies are brought in order to sustain itself. And the financial sector became the sort of predominant aspect of the US economy. This is kind of essentially what happened. Now, when this happens, this is the interesting thing. So I actually want to bring up a case to start off with, and kind of build off of that. In 2017, we had the Florida real estate scandal, right, where sex trafficking is specifically actually linked to Jeffrey Epstein, Epstein, not Einstein,
Epstein.
Epstein. Epstein. It's okay. It's okay. Sometimes, me and names. I'm not great with names. Anybody who knows me on a personal level knows it's my biggest struggle. Don't know why. If anybody knows, please let me know.
I'm not trying to interrupt you because I know you're about to go into a flow state, but I do like how you pronounce facilitate and not facilitate.
Oh yeah, sorry, facilitate. Sorry.
All right.
Either way.
So Florida scandal.
Yes. So the 2017 Florida real estate scandal, where, like I said, it's related to Epstein, and sex trafficking money was used to purchase luxury condos, specifically, in the south of Florida, from what I understand, and billions were made off of this. Now, why do I bring this up? It was a massive scandal in 2017. This was even after, obviously, Jeffrey Epstein at this point was already a convicted sex criminal. This goes back to 2008. And we see this sort of same reoccurring theme. Something else that also has been, revealed as a consequence of the Transparency Act with regards to the Epstein Files is obviously as well his relationship with things like, JP Morgan Bank. JP Morgan Bank, just again, keep to the facts because I like to keep to the fact, kept processing transactions for Epstein for years after he was convicted again of sex trafficking, because he was, quote, a high net worth earner. And he would also bring a massive network of elites with him that generated enormous profits for these banks. I mean, we're talking profits in the hundreds of millions and billions that were actually being bought in as a result of working with Jeffrey Epstein. And it's not just Jeffrey Epstein himself, right? Because there's multiple cases like this, whether it's dealing with, drug cartels and illicit funds from like weapons smuggling, that, fuel the, I guess, American economy. And in fact, I will actually quote this. Human trafficking in the United States is one of the largest industries that basically fuel the financial economy of the United States. This is right after drug trafficking, alongside obviously weapon smuggling. This is how significant it is and how quintessential it is to the very fiber of sustaining the U.S. economy. And Jeffrey Epstein is obviously a part of that, as well as other actors. It's not just Jeffrey Epstein. You've got multiple cartels who function and bring a lot of money into the same sort of system. We saw the same sort of scandals happen with HSBC around when 2008 crisis had happened. HSBC was caught basically not smuggling, but kind of laundering or helping turn dirty money into clean money for multiple Mexican cartels. And the same thing happened with Jeffrey Epstein with his, relationships with JP Morgan and also Deutsche Bank. And the reason why this happens is fundamentally because from a banking perspective, from a finance perspective, again, when you think about the fact that according to the International Labor Organization, over 250 billion is made annually in terms of human trafficking, that would include sex trafficking. And around 38% of that is actually sex trafficking. That money is then fueled. Most of this goes back into the 20 largest banks in the world, especially American banking system. What does this mean? It means that the bank is making a lot of money. Every transaction fee, all these transfer fees, and the way laundering works as well, there's going to be multiple layers of transfers that are occurring. Every single time that happens, the bank is making a lot of money. At the same time, they're also, maintaining the account, where again, they're making a lot of money. There's also a business to be made through anti-money laundering policies themselves. So just to explain what I mean. anti-money laundering policies are essentially part of the corporate social responsibility of any financial institution or any company. And it's most law around the world, both in the United States and even in the EU, as well as generally globally, is that there aren't any centralized hard law sort of means by which to regulate. And what happens is that through corporate social responsibility, and I don't want to overcomplicate this, through corporate social responsibility, a lot of these banks and financial institutions self-govern, right? So there are guidelines that are provided through, EU directives, or through, I think it's a FinCom for the United States, which is the financial crimes network that actually provides a sort of guidelines as to how anti-money laundering policies are supposed to work. But at the end of the day, each company has they draft their own anti-money laundering policies that they have to abide by, and they have to self-regulate. This is the equivalent of when the IDF commits a crime and says, we're going to investigate ourselves. That is what happens within these financial institutions. And so they self-govern. And there's an expectation through deregulation, which was popularized, especially from the 1980s onwards, as part of the neoliberal policies and the new framework of imperialism that took place from the 1980s onwards. There's this expectation that companies are going to act ethically. Obviously, that's not the case, because when a huge influx of money is coming in, that's generating these enormous wealth for them. Because, like I said, you've got all these transaction fees, maintenance fees. But you also have the fact that now you have all these millions, or billions rather, into your bank, which you can then inject into the economy. You're basically creating, you're injecting this money so people can, buy houses, or to increase consumer demand, or, to basically be able to use, so that then, the economy keeps fueling itself. That means that you're making greater interest based on mortgages and so forth. And a lot of that money does go into real estate, as we'll come to find. So the financial sector is making billions off of that. And the interesting thing here is, and I'll actually again go back to the case of JP Morgan and Epstein in particular, is that even when they get caught, I think there was a report by, here it is, the Gundin's Proctor 2020 analysis. I'm probably Goodwin. I can't read my own handwriting, but anyway, I've got the report. I can actually just post it because I wrote it quite quickly so I don't forget. But in the 2020 analysis, it actually found that between 0.4% and 1.6% of annual revenue in the is of a company's average revenue goes towards paying these fines. So when they get caught violating, anti-money laundering policies, or working with people like Epstein, for example, they pay a penalty. However, it's usually about 0.4% to 1% of all the profits that they make in a year. It's nothing. So you got a business model that's established from a cross-benefit analysis for these financial institutions. You would want to work with, somebody like Epstein, or continue to, take in these illicit funds, because it's generating enormous profits for the banks, for the shareholders, for real estate, for for consumer spending, for the stock market bubble, because all this money is now flowing into the economy. It keeps the American economy afloat. And at the same time, if you do happen to get caught, you're only paying about 0.4% of your profits for a single year. That's nothing. That's nothing.
And honestly, that's just part of the illicit advantages and profits from human trafficking. There's plenty of human trafficking that happens that's absolutely legal. When I think about everything from chattel slavery and the transatlantic slave trade to let me think. Why am I blanking? Oh yeah, Irish children were forcibly taken from their parents and pushed into indentured servitude in the U.S. by the British. Now that Jim Crow is done and slavery is done, we have the new Jim Crow, which creates vast amounts of money for private corporations through the detaining of human bodies in the carceral state. 90% of all ICE detention beds are essentially for profit, and now we're expanding the concentration camp system, actually opening old concentration camps that were built for. I was just in Minneapolis. They're reopening Fort Snelling, which was where a concentration camp for the Dakota Native Indigenous Americans, and they're reopening old Japanese concentration camps out in California. So that in and of itself, if you're still on the ZOG train, should be like, maybe we've been doing this for a while. We are literally revamping all of these old colonial institutions to just keep this human trafficking racket going forward.
Exactly. And this is one of the most important things that people need to understand, is that the system in itself depends on actors like Jeffrey Epstein. It depends on cartels. It depends on illicit funds, but also on other forms of exploitation that are not necessarily technically illicit. Even migration, but this is another a topic for another conversation. The way international law is and asylum seeking for asylum seekers is sort of laid out. It's particularly made in order to incentivize illegal migration, because then it creates a premise by which there's exploitative labor, and that exploitative labor becomes an avenue of opportunity for companies, businesses to exploit people who are desperate, essentially. And this is the point of capitalism. It creates a sort of desperation and this sort of poverty and inhumane conditions in order to be able to better exploit them. And so with regards, I just want to actually go quickly back to the JP Morgan case, because so when essentially it was obviously revealed the kind of relations that he still maintained with Epstein, after, I keep saying Epstein, even after the 2008 conviction, by another 15 years, when held accountable, JP Morgan paid 75 million settlement to U.S. Virgin Islands and 290 million to victims. And although this seems like a lot, it actually accounted for exactly 1.5% of its annual earnings. I think it was of 2018 of its annual profits. So it was absolutely nothing. And they go on as business as usual. And I also think it's important to note here that, JP Morgan, there's two things. JP Morgan is the same sort of bank that also made an enormous amount of profits and established itself as a result of the Holocaust during the Nazi sort of Holocaust.
So we definitely want to expand on this point, because there is an assumption among people that go down the ZOG train instead of the it's capitalism train, who say that Hitler, and I'm just going to be I guess kind of like dialectic here, say that Hitler did this because of the Jewish banking system that was destroying the country. But no, the Holocaust was basically just a war on working class folks, from everything from socialists to union organizers to working class Jews. The JP Morgans, the Jewish elite, they were fine. They worked hand in hand with the Nazis and got fabulously wealthy. So when you say things like, I exist a lot on right-wing circles to see what the conversation is. Like this Zionist Occupied Government thing would never have happened if the quote Austrian painter had its way. Dude, that's so ahistorical. Just pointing that out.
No, but it's an important point that needs to be made. I mean, if we're going to have this conversation, it's always important to remember that at the end of the day, these are capitalists. They're driven solely by maximizing their wealth. This is a class war, and they don't care who they're going to align with. They don't care what race or religion you are. As long as you're able to continue to sustain the capitalist system that basically fuels their the money in their pockets, they will collaborate with you. So in the same way that they had collaborated with Hitler in order to exploit, like you said, in Nazi Germany, even the concentration camps initially were made actually for the socialists and the communists. It wasn't even for the Jews. And then obviously he went for working class Jews, etc. And he was appropriating the wealth of working class Jews and basically using that to pay off debt to American banks, and that went straight into JP Morgan Chase. And they were also helping him, essentially structure this. And they made an abundant amount of profits off of it. This was off of the backs of Jews. They didn't care. Today, fast forward in the future, they were working alongside Epstein, who himself was a Jew, who was engaging in himself, in this, a mass criminal activity of sexual exploitation and abhorrent criminality, because it obviously generated enormous surplus value for them. And that's important for the structures that be. And this is one of the aspects that I think a lot of people seem to miss. They don't care who they have to collaborate with, as long as they are able to extract wealth. And I also just want to say something that I think is also quite important here. In the case, for example, again of JP Morgan didn't just continue to work with Epstein, but they were actually also found to be giving him guidance as to how to essentially bypass regulations. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is actively helping criminality, and this is well known because, and I don't want to obviously over discuss this, but because of the fact that anti-money laundering policies and regulation is so self-governed by the same corporations that uphold power and hold the entire financial structure in the United States. There's an enormous business that's been created even with that. So they receive funding and payments in order to basically help members of the elite to be able to, especially not even the elite alone, but also, criminal actors like Epstein to engage in money laundering by using their particular software and policies to actually kind of find ways to maneuver through the system. And I think, there was actually, again, a report by FinCom in the United States that found that 2.7 billion in just 2022 alone was made by these institutions, by these financial services and banks, because they were helping members of the elite or financial, or these sort of illicit characters be able to launder all their criminal proceedings, because that brought a lot of wealth into their pockets. And like I said, that goes straight into the economy, straight into the real estate sector, straight into stocks, bonds. Hedge funds have a field day off of this. A lot of these illicit funds also go into hedge funds who make a 20% profit off of all the money that goes in, and all the profits that are accumulated off of that. So you have to understand, this is much bigger than just Israel. If Israel ceased to exist tomorrow, these structures will still remain, and they will find alternative means by which to continue this sort of these sort of actions. And what's becoming increasingly problematic is that we're not having these conversations. We're not looking at the system that's created the Epsteins, that's created Zionism. We're just looking to blame individual actors as sort of personalizing blame to, oh, it's Epstein, oh, it's Israel, oh, it's Zionism. If that goes away,
or now problematically, because it's untrue, it's quote the Jews.
Jews,
even if from like the propagandized right-wing perspective, even if Israel didn't exist, even if Zionism didn't exist, the Jews were still in charge of the banks, coming up into out through medieval Europe, and then the Spanish Inquisition got rid of them, and this is the whole problem. So that does exist. So from this perspective of the ZOG perspective, which I continuously want to attack, it's not just Israel, it's not just Zionism, it is the Jews in general. And that is kind of ahistorical, because we have to look at how did Jews become in charge of the banking system, and that goes back to medieval Europe, and goes throughout up into contemporary history. Then you had a bunch of Jewish supremacists joining with Anglo supremacists in a match made in hell over finance capitalism, and they both created this symbiotic relationship together, just like the crown or medieval monarchies had a symbiotic relationship with Jewish bankers, because they were the only ones who could do it, and the crown needed money, and who else were you going to go to? And then sometimes if they racked up too much debt, they would just do a pogrom, purge the Jews, and boom, it's done. That's incredibly reductive, but they've always been the diaspora has always had to cultivate alternate power bases and sources of power that the ruling elite have always used and exploited to their own benefit. Is that
I agree.
Is that a good way of explaining it in the most reductive terms possible?
I think he gets to the point. I was just going to build on what you said.
Yeah.
But this is the thing. So the Jewish people historically, have been excluded This is what it is. And exclusion had created a niche. In order to be able to obviously, support themselves, they had to engage. I mean, they were there was, like you said, going back to obviously medieval Europe, there was a lot of moralism, around
money lending,
issuing loans,
usury,
money lending, etc. And so the Jews essentially not being persecuted, not being allowed access to land, etc. They need to find means by which to sustain themselves and be able to live and exist as people within a society. And so this is how they basically entered this realm of, I guess, finance. Now, throughout most of history, that was pretty much, in many ways, to a certain degree, it was a little bit more in the margins, especially as the Industrial Revolution came to be. But this is the thing. The fact that exclusion created a niche, and then that niche became a core in finance capitalism as we moved away from industrial capital into finance capital. So what was a historical disadvantage became an advantage as the material conditions change. And it's important to have that dialectical understanding of things. And this is kind of why so many Jews are found within the finance sector. However, that doesn't take away from the fact that yes, they were persecuted, and this is why they are where they are today. And it's when you start falling into the trap, however, that simply only the Jews are, control everything, then you have a bit of a problem. You can acknowledge that there is a historical reason why they are there, but understand how, even up until like the 1920s, there was a lot of discrimination towards, even Jews within finance and their finance sector. However, again, as we moved away from industrial capital and into finance capital, a symbiotic relationship began to develop with even Anglo-American capitalists. It's a mistake to assume for a second that there's only a particular group that is behind the current financial structures around the world. It's not. It's a pre-existing groups that were already there, and now what we're seeing is this realignment of, I guess, the allies that are being created as a result of the material conditions today. And this is one of the most problematic aspects as well. The kind of narratives that we're seeing that is coming out of the Epstein Files is sort of this very regressive interpretation of history, but also this idea that just simply Jews are the only actors within capitalism. That's not the case. They happen to just be in a position now fundamentally because of historical conditions. However, there were other actors there, and now a symbiotic relationship has been created. But it's still a class struggle at the end of the day.
It really is, because I'm thinking of another massive capitalist who a lot of these people on the right read, who was just a real piece of shit, and that's Henry Ford. We can talk about why this is a class struggle, even though, because like he wrote his intense anti-Semitism, which kind of like manifested in the 1920s through his newspaper, the Dearborn Independent. The book series, like The International Jew, was driven by a combination of like conspiracy theories, rural populist prejudices, and a personal search for scapegoats for his own malfeasance. So like he did believe or push the belief in this international conspiracy, the existence of the Jewish conspiracy that controlled world finances, governments, and media. He believed that the international Jewish money power was responsible for fueling wars for profit, arguing in 1915 to 20, Jewish German bankers caused World War I, all of this stuff. And part of this was just rural populist views. But he also used Jews, and this is the main class thing. He also used Jews to oppose modernizations and unions. He blamed Jews for what he saw as the moral decay of American society, including the rise of jazz, alcohol, immoral media. But he also, this is his fundamental union busting belief, what he used to justify this. He also believed that labor unions and labor unrest were part of a Jewish plot to destroy an industrial empire. So, yeah.
We also have to remember the Jews were also to blame for, communism and the Bolsheviks, and they're all, the threat to Western civil order because of communism is actually a Jewish conspiracy as well.
So they're at both one time in charge of the entire finance capital system, but also communism. Amazing guy.
Uh,
Good
eh,
job.
but I mean, but and this was coming out. These narratives were both coming out of the United States at the same time, around the same time. This is the contradictions of these narratives, and what they do again is distract from looking at the systemic issues that have brought the current have brought the current conditions from actually happening. So, and this is the thing, there will be a lot of arguments, and I think it's also worth touching on, in terms of like how there is a conversation as well, just so we can cover it, with Epstein sort of speaking in derogatory terms of non-Jews, etc., and the concept of Jewish supremacy and so forth. All of this, fair enough, can exist depending on how you interpret it, and there is, I would argue, there is a predisposition to that within Judaism.
Mhm.
However, that can lend itself to capitalism, and it can be exploited. And this is the thing: the situation with, one of the reasons why there are so many Jews who are Zionists, the more overwhelming majority of Jews, is fundamentally because of the exploitation of history, how history has been narrated to them in order to
Weaponized
fuel.
against them.
It's been weaponized against them, and that's why as well, like, they're also kind of being used as collateral in many ways. And simultaneously, yes, there is an ideological factor within Judaism as a faith as well that can lend itself into that, in combination with other material historical sort of conditions. However, again, this does not in any way, shape, or form take away from the fact that at the end of the day, capitalism as it exists, it's exploitative. It's exploitative, and I will always say, like, it's incredibly barbaric and violent, and its need to constantly appropriate in order to serve itself existed prior to Zionism. It will continue to exist after it, unless action is taken in order to tackle the problem itself, and that is, obviously the capitalist, institutions and the bourgeois class that it's protecting.
I mean, you can
And
see
that
this.
is why,
You can see
Yeah.
this class struggle in Israel itself just through a simple experiment. There are a lot of different types of Jews that have different kind of ethnicities within the overarching ethnicity, I guess, or cultural identity of Judaism. You talk about Jewish supremacy. Look at the Knesset. Look at the Israeli parliament. It's all Europeans. It's all Europeans. I was just over there. All the prison guards at the prison we were taken to, all of the soldiers were very Mediterranean or dark. Some were like Ethiopians as well. But you will never see those people represented in government. They are not the CEOs of the big tech companies in Israel. They are not. They are the labor force. And that is why so many terror operations were conducted by the Mossad to scare all of these other Jews who are living in Iraq, in Morocco, to get them to come to Israel to build out a population and sub-equal labor force and military force for the European ruling elite who came into Palestine. Like every way you approach this, it's about class and not about Jewish supremacy. It's about the supremacy of a few ruling elites versus everybody else, because the Israelis are super exploited too. They are. We know this. So
within their own structures. Obviously,
Yes.
there's levels to everything. There is
Yeah.
levels to everything. This is how imperialism works. There's exploitation, for example, of the imperial core in the United States, but that will look different to how the imperial core exploits, Kenya or this general African continent and so forth. But at the end of the day, ultimately, what happens is that, and what we always have to remember is that there is a system that is in place, and that system is always going to find ways to preserve itself. It's going to find other ideologies and groups of people who are, prone to some sort of exceptionalism to exploit, and in order to, continue this fueling of this continuation of empire by exploiting these kind of ideologies inside, and by, again, like I said, even sponsoring them. Because again, even going back to Hitler, a lot of his campaign money was actually coming from the United States and private corporations in the United States, who at that point anyway owned the vast majority of the private sector that existed in Germany, and allied and stood behind, essentially backing Hitler in his initial stages. And they did that very strategically. And we're seeing the same thing happen with Zionism. And we're going to see the same thing happen again. It will be another ideology that's going to be produced, that's going to be used in order to continue to facilitate the same system. So what I feel like it's important to remember when we're looking at these files is just to not become overly fixated on personalities, but actually looking at it from a more systemic angle, from a more systemic, dialectical angle, if you may. And that is, at the end of the day, Epstein is just one factor of an entire capitalist structure. He was not a lone actor. There's many Epsteins within, not just from Israel, but in the United States, from all parts of the world, who are fueling the American machine. And like, I will also say this as well, like the whole idea of tax havens and money laundering. I mean, tax havens, they existed in the 20s and the 30s, and in sort of kind of more discrete ways, but it became pretty much heyday, as it's called, in the 1970s. And the reason for that was, was because the United States needed to balance its deficit, because it went from being a surplus country into a deficit country very rapidly, as it's obviously gradually moving towards deindustrialization, following its own natural, capitalist course. And they needed a way in order to make up the money that they were essentially losing. And part of that was creating the whole idea and the basis of tax havens, of which many of them are in the United States as well. I mean, you got places, states like Wyoming, et cetera, Delaware, who are tax havens of their own. Plus, then you got Panama, that was pretty much set up by the United States to do this kind of dirty work. And the whole idea was to basically bring in criminal money. And I will actually also say this: in 2008, it was found in 2008 is that the vast majority of banks that were facing crises during the recession, they were able to actually balance the economy and balance their own, capital flows by using illicit funds. So what do we see there? When capitalism was in crisis, illicit funds from human trafficking, drug cartels, and weapon smuggling, all these major industries that bring in billions, were able to actually safeguard and act as a counter tendency to capitalism's crisis. So again, these are part of the structure. Epstein plays a part in that, and it's part of the system itself. The only way to get rid of these individuals and these characters and these crimes, is to get rid of capitalism, really, and the kind of logic that produces this sort of violence. In all forms around the world.
That's the real crux of it. So I live around a lot of like libertarians here in Texas. We don't need to get into it, but their main gripe is like that this system is inherently good, like free markets, deregulation, all stuff like that. The utopia of perfect competition that won't lead to abject monopolies, right? Their thing is, they just hyper focus on the Zionist aspect, and that's kind of, from an information operations perspective, the whole point. Yes, just like blame the Jews for this, and like some of them do read that Henry Ford. I was talking to a guy who just like read Henry Ford's book, The International Jew, and that all fits into the system of how like insanely propagandized we are. That it kind of reminds me of the liberals in a lot of respects. Like they believe that the system and the status quo is inherently good. Ronald Reagan effed it up, and then we just need to fix it. We need to reform it. And just like the libertarians think, this capitalist free market system is inherently good. We just need more deregulation and to get the Jews out, and that will fix it. All of this. All of these different ideologies, these reform ideologies, these only focusing on one aspect of the system, is what upholds it in the first place.
Exactly. Because you're not blaming capitalism. You're saying, oh, no, capitalism works. It's just our government is compromised, or there are just some bad actors. And so if we just get rid of them and we go back to, good old fashioned capitalism, everything will be fine. But they don't seem to understand or accept it.
Yeah, which is insane. Yeah. Like even under like the New Deal, like we had a massive industrial base that doesn't exist anymore.
No, it doesn't. Exactly.
That's how we went.
This is the crux of it.
Yeah.
This is the critical problem. Like when I spoke before about the financial sector, if, for example, if these illicit funds weren't making their way into American capital, maybe during the crisis there would have been a complete collapse of the American economy. That is very that they were able to safeguard against the collapse of the American economy. Today, like I said, they're able to keep money flowing, keep real estate prices up, creating asset price inflation. That's great for landlords. That's great for real estate moguls. It's great for all banks, hedge funds, all these stock. All their stock markets, and that's the entirety of the U.S. economy. If, for example, even all this human trafficking, all these illicit funds were to shut down, I mean, of course, there's so many different aspects to the U.S. economy, but that would be a huge blow to the American economy that's already struggling. This is how integral these sort of structures are to American capitalism, and unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand it. So when they say, "Oh, capitalism is the problem," well, kind of is. It's facilitative, saying it correctly, to these sorts of outcomes, but that's not going to be acknowledged.
And again, even if you have this utopian kind of like reactionary vision, mythical vision of the 50s or the 60s, which is kind of like where a lot of people from the MAGA movement get their ideology from. We still had industries. There wasn't this massive gap of wealth inequality that can't be resolved. There wasn't a need to redistribute massive amounts of wealth amongst the people because people were protected. There was a 91% tax rate on the uber rich. CEOs can only make like 5x the salary of their workers. And they're like, so when people call to like reform the system or go back to a bygone era, which didn't really exist, but they think it was better, because it was in a lot of respects. It's better than it is now for a lot of people. That's not possible anymore. It's just not going to happen. We're not going to reindustrialize. We do not have the political will, which has been designed this way, to reinstitute actual sane tax laws, tax codes on the uber rich. Most of their living expenses comes through like capital gains, realized or unrealized, and they have this whole scheme called buy, where you buy capital. Real estate, investments, stocks, collectibles, rare artwork, and it appreciates, and you get money, and then you can take out loans and leverage debt against it, and you just borrow off of it, and then die, and then you pass up all the assets on to your heirs and trusts, and that's how you skirt capital gains taxes. There's just a whole bunch of different cutouts for how the uber rich remain uber rich generationally, and I started off the quote of this episode with Warren Buffett. He said, again, there's class warfare, all right, but it's my class, the rich class, that's making war and we're winning. He wasn't saying that. As much as I don't like him, as much as I think he's a piece of shit because he's like runs Berkshire Hathaway, which is the biggest like healthcare racket portfolio ever. He was saying that essentially the tax code is dominated by the rich and determined by the rich. There is no reforming any of this. So harkening back to the beginning of the episode, when we talk about the pageantry of the Republicans and the Democrats, they're not even offering you reform anymore. They're offering the optics of not having Trump around anymore and his oligarch friends. Well, where they'll slink back into the shadows where you don't see him anymore and continue to determine U.S. Tax codes and foreign policy and domestic policy.
Yeah, completely agree with you. I mean, this is just the reality of the situation. The only way for the United States to save itself, it would require a socializing of its means of production. That would mean the capitalists having a huge change of heart. That's not going to happen anytime soon. And this goes back to, I guess, the aggressive foreign policy that we're seeing. And I just wanted to touch on this just very quickly. When we're seeing what the United States has been doing even prior to Trump, whether it's in, what happened in Gaza under obviously a Biden administration, the sort of aggressive, the war economy against China, the trade wars with China actually, yes, began with Trump in his first term, but it did continue under the Trump administration. The sort of use of sanctions and political threats to countries of the global South in order to push them away from collaborating with China. the long-standing, decades-long worth war, against Iran. This has been bipartisan and has been going on for decades, and it's highly relevant to Israel. It has everything to do with sustaining access to cheap resources, wealth, trade routes, and trying to sustain imperialism, and most importantly, to push back and isolate and encircle and contain adversaries, whether that's Russia, whether that's China. And so this is just very important because a lot of these Epstein files as well, the narratives that was also discussed by a lot of people, like, oh well, these files came out and they're trying to force, the idea is to force the United States into war with Iran. Nobody needs to force the United States into war with Iran. If they have been at war with Iran since the Islamic, or even prior to the Islamic Revolution, they've had, they have been the Anglo-American world has been constantly imposing itself on Iran, orchestrating the coup in 1953, preventing.
On behalf of British Petroleum and MI6, CIA was like, let's get in on this train because, we don't want to fight an oil-starved war against the Soviets, Red Scare stuff. Let's, make sure those oil fields are ours. It's kind of insane to think, like, based on history, to think that the U.S. needs an excuse to attack Iran.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at the sanctions warfare as well, between 1979 until now, I mean, we're talking about some of the most, I think the Lancet report in 2018 described them as barbaric and a violation of human rights. It has killed in excess hundreds of thousands of Iranians. These sanctions are excess deaths rather in Iran, to say the least. I mean, the destruction of the economy, the impact that it's had on the Iranian people is so severe. And this is nothing to do with Israel. It has everything to do with the United States wanting, rather, it's the elite ruling class that, I guess, it controls the United States, wanting access to Iran's resources and its strategic location, and in terms of its trade routes, and now as well in the digital age, given that Iran is in a position, especially in terms of its relationship with BRICS, and a power that is, I guess, pushing back against American imperialism. This is becoming an absolute threat to the United States. In more ways than one, including the threat of de-dollarization, which the United States depends upon. And by the way, this is another aspect why finance capital and the need for illicit funds is so important as well to the United States, being able to sustain itself and maintain the dollar, and by investing in capital assets and therefore keeping those capital assets of value. You see, it's all very much interconnected, and it's very important to understand that these files are not going to do anything to stop or accelerate the United States position when it comes to its foreign policy goals and objectives. What's going to happen in Iran is going to happen in Iran, and these files are not. They don't even say a good deal very much anyway. So yeah.
Now the theory is, the Justice Department won't release the full files, but who will? Israel. So I don't know. I think we've covered
why would
a lot.
Why would you kill your leverage? Why would you kill your leverage? I mean, if I was Israel, I wouldn't. Okay, because once that's all goes, okay, once you've just exposed all the rest of the file, it's just a bit
until you internalize the fact that we would be doing this, whether or not Israel wanted us to do it, whether or not Israel existed in the first place. I don't think you're really going to get it. So, I mean, hopefully this episode was like, I don't know, we went over some stuff that might convince people. I know it's kind of like a complex topic, especially when you get into like the financial aspects, which I'm not an expert on at all. But just go off history, just go off who's working together and fighting together. I think historical precedence is the best way for people without a huge backing in economics to kind of comprehend what we're talking about. This is structural, it's institutional, and it's ideological, and it happened independently of Zionism. It predated Zionism and the Israeli project. Mm-hmm. So our behavior hasn't changed. None of our institutions have changed. We're now calling in the Alien Enemies Act on U.S. citizens, which was passed in 1798 to safeguard the U.S. Federalist interests against revolutionary France. So none of this is new, guys. And so when you just blame Israel or the Zionist Occupied Government, you're like missing not even half the picture, most of the picture, because it's just
Yeah, and
completely ahistorical.
it is. It is. And like I said, you can acknowledge obviously that there are Jewish people in power, but they belong to a certain class as well, and that class is symbiotic with other people of the other members of the bourgeoisie who are non-Jewish, who have pre-existed even the Jews within that particular class. It is a system that safeguards and protects the interests of capital, and that even that capital, that bourgeoisie is, it's not restricted to any group. Religious group or otherwise. It is transnational, if you would like. I know Mark loves it when I bring that up, so we'll also a little shout out to Mark as well. But it really is very true, and it's very important to remember that, and so to not be disorientated. I think that's the most important aspect, to be disorientated in our analysis going forward by the Epstein Files, by the chaos that's surrounding it, and to always follow the money. And I always say, just keep following the money, understand how these things operate. Because ultimately, the way that they use this is an information war, and the way that they're using the files, the way that they're trying to control the information, what is leaked, how it's leaked, and how it's been framed, is strategically done in order to disorientate the masses and to preserve themselves. I was going to say something else, but now I can't remember what it was I was going to say.
Look, the man wants you to only blame the Jews. So get the boot out of your mouth and look at the whole system, y'all. Stop doing what they want you to do. Yeah. So
I think so. Oh yeah, I was going to say, for those that are interested, I am planning on doing one of my lengthy pieces. If you guys are interested in the economics and law aspect, but like a little bit in the nerdy side of it, I will write a more in-depth piece, like going through all the case, the legal material, but also like the economic and dialectical analysis. I just wanted to put that. It's going to be probably on my Substack or Patreon, because I'm already working on it, and it's gonna be a bit more of a deep dive for those that are just interested to go that extra step, I guess, and stress themselves out.
I'm sure a lot of people would be interested in that. So yeah, I'm going to link your article on the Epstein Files rollout in the description. I've got to go do lame campaign stuff in my anti-campaign campaign for Congress. The system cannot be reformed.
I'm campaigning to tell you don't campaign.
Yeah, no. I mean, look,
you're gonna love it.
We know if you do enough like reading about like from revolutionary material that you got to dogpile this from every angle: direct action, community organizing, education, and electoral politics, and to build alternate or dual sources of power for when this whole house of cards comes crashing down, which looks
exhausting all means of class struggle.
Yeah,
exhausting all the means of class struggle, Greg.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm not going to ask you to vote for me or even vote, but I will ask that you start getting involved in your communities. Do you know who your neighbor is? No, because we've been isolated and propagandized for so long in terms of rugged individualism for us, and then, corporate socialism, or like, corporate socialism or socialism for the rich, essentially, with our tax money. Look, so we're going to do that. And I'm running in Texas. I'm not putting forward my campaign, but this is what one of my opponents just released a video. His name is Vincent Shlomi. He is the ShamWow guy, who disappeared for like 2 decades after having his tongue almost bitten off by an escort, and then he like kept punching her, and they both copped assault charges. And this is his big public comeback.
I'm running for Congress against this guy. Stop having a politician that's worse than Biden.
That's discretionary funding.
Instead,
yeah, that's that's John Carter, the incumbent for Texas District 31.
Vote for me, a guy who's not half dead. I'm gonna soak up the swamp, clean the house, and pick up those liberal tears at the same time. I'm gonna slap chop the nuts out of the woke, making less blue-haired commies and more red-blooded Americans. Vote for me so I can represent you and the ones that can't stand up for themselves.
Okay. Oh, wait.
Wow. Paid for by Offer Vid ShamWow Shlomi for Congress.
Okay, I would like to point out when he talks about red-blooded Americans, he was born in Israel. So, yeah, that's fun. This is the absolute shit show that is Texas politics. And if you think Texas politics can be reformed, you're just as delusional as thinking electoral politics throughout the country and capitalism can be reformed. So we're going to start small. We're going to agitate, educate, and hopefully organize some folks, and that's what we're doing. So, yeah, this has been our episode on the fallacious theory of the ZOG machine, of the deep state. It's not the deep state. You know, you can read books like The Devil's Chessboard. You know, Alan Dulles, the CIA, and the Rise of America's Secret Government. I don't like this framing. It's a great book. I don't like this framing though, because it's not the secret government. The CIA has always just been an appendage of Wall Street and the uber rich. So it's an enforcement mechanism for imperialism abroad. You know, so that's where we are. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Any last comments, Alina?
Oh no, I think we've covered everything. Just to be diligent, to always remember to, like I said, follow the money and understand that ultimately this is a class war, and to always understand the events that are transpiring and all the actors involved as symbiotic for the most part. And keep being critical of everything that comes out.
Yeah. And do what you can in your own personal sphere to educate people. Good luck with the libertarians, getting them on board with all these ideas, but I believe in you, okay? You can do it. And we will see you. I'm super busy with this, but we're going to try to do one episode a week going forward here on Colonial Outcasts. The past 2 weeks have been insane with the campaign rollout, but we will see you next week. Thanks so much for listening. Good night and good luck. Have a great weekend. And I'll see you next time. Cool. I'm just going to keep this going just in case we download and miss anything. You know, sometimes we just release the special one on Patreon. I lost focus halfway through. I need 80.
Oh, I'm sorry, man.
No. It was me. I need to call the VA, get set up with a psychiatrist appointment, because I'm having, I don't know if it's AI or social media that's rotting my brain, but I'm having trouble focusing. It also might just be run-of-the-mill depression too. Who knows?
It could be a lot of things. Listen, I'm not gonna lie. I had the same problem. I can lose focus. I have been struggling the last couple of weeks. Remember I told you I was really stressed out for this one. Yeah. Usually I'm on point, but in the last few weeks, I feel like I have a lot of brain fog. I know I have all the information in my head, but for some reason I'm struggling to process it out. My sister's like, "Oh no, you've got what's it called? Burnout." That's what it is. I'm like, I don't know, man. All I know is that, and I do know that I have a tendency. I have ADHD, so I do tend towards that direction, but recently it's just been whoa. I didn't want to overdo it because I could see at one point I was like, oh, I think I lost Greg, so I didn't mention a lot of my points.
You didn't lose me. I lost me. I also think
an existential thing.
Yeah, I also think I'm burned out too. I don't know. It's just
I think we are, man.
Going on.
It's always a lot of information. It's just a lot of information to constantly process, to write, to produce, to think, to analyze, because you have to keep up to date. You're taking in a lot of information and you're not giving yourself a bit of a break. It's a bit much.
You know what I'm going to do? Instead of engaging so much with the news cycle, I have a bunch of community meetings to go throughout the district to show up. Maybe I'm just going to focus on local issues and just take a break, because this district is getting absolutely screwed by the data centers and these high transmission power lines, and it's a nationwide issue. They're getting into eminent domain. A lot of old folks are getting pissed off because they moved out to the country to retire, and now they're their property is now ground zero for these horrendous power. It's crazy. It's just really demonstrating to people across political lines that these corporations and multinational interests can do whatever the hell they want. And
I mean, this is why it's important, I guess, to do your anti-campaign campaign. I love it, man. Your anti-campaign campaign, this is where it's important, because that is what's going to gives you the opportunity to have these conversations with people and develop that kind of class consciousness. Like it is important to have these conversations because the United States is in for a very rough time. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, I think not only the material conditions going to get so much more worse, but the chaos alone. And there is a lot of agitation. There is a lot of frustration in the United States. That's why I feel, your anti-campaign campaign is a good information war platform for yourself. So, use it right, man. Use it correctly, and who knows, maybe District 31 is where the revolution starts. I'm just
okay. I've been getting asked. It's a super conservative district, and I thought it was going to be harder reaching people than it actually is. So I get asked a lot, like where I am on the political
spectrum
section, because I'm running I'm a third party candidate, but I'm running it independently of any party. So I say, like, just consider me an independent because I have no allegiance to the Green Party, and I'm really not in touch with the Central Committee. Not that the Green Party has like anything organized at all. But they're like, where do you stand politically? I was like, well, I'm a journalist. I do a lot of political commentary. Most of my criticism is directed towards the Democratic Party establishment. And they're like, okay, so are you like conservative or you're not a liberal? I was like, no, I'm actually on the left. And they're like, huh, what does that mean? And I explained it to them this way. I was like, the Democratic establishment has this saying that they deploy to discredit people on the left and the right. It's called the horseshoe theory. So if you take a horseshoe, the liberals and the Democrats sit in the center up top. It is like the most enlightened position. And they say if you go too far right or too far left, you meet in the middle. And they don't like that. So we actually have a lot more in common, according to the Democrats, than you think. And they're like, huh, interesting. And it's kind of been
that works.
Yeah, it's been working, if you go far enough left, you go far enough left, you get your guns back.
So what I tend to find with a lot of people who are more on the right is that they have an issue with government. They have an issue with power. That's always like a common theme. They have an issue with being taxed or migration or all these particular themes. And like, oh, this is communism. And then, so when I started actually saying, well, actually, ideally in a communist society, it's a stateless society. Like, well, there's no actual government. Like when you reach an actual communist society, that sort of thing. Ideally, in that society, these power structures shouldn't exist. And actually, even taxation is considered to be a tool of the capitalists. They kind of go, what? And then they start asking a series of questions. And by the end of it, they're like, you know what? I'm going to go and read Marx. I did not know this. It just goes from like, our government is communist to a whole other direction. Because this is the thing. A lot of people don't actually have access to that information. So your anti-campaign campaign is a good way. You don't have to do it the way I do it, because obviously it's different. But like, it's a way to use their frustrations and explain to them actually where their frustrations are rooted from. And then you'll be surprised how many people are actually like, oh, okay, to think about it like that. A light bulb goes off.
I haven't met an actual diehard, like sectarian MAGA extremist in years. Like I
don't even think they exist that much anymore.
They're all bots out of Nigeria and Bangalore.
I think at one point, yes, they existed, etc. But I think since Trump came to power in his second term, everything that he's done, the wars, Ukraine, basically fucking all these tax cuts for like the wealthy, for his friends, and the terrorist wars, and the snapback mechanisms, and the rhetoric and ICE. I think a lot of that it kind of goes against the whole idea of him being anti-establishment that a lot of the MAGA base was supposed to be about. And it's really made them question.
Well, they saw him.
What it was that they supported.
They saw him as this populist, like revolutionary figure that was going to burn the system down. And like, he couldn't be bought or bribed because he was already a billionaire. But if you ever grew up around these people, you know that's not a thing. It never stops. Like their identity is wrapped up in who they know, who they hang out with, their network, business deals. Like it's the rush. It's just all they know.
But that's the thing, isn't it? But bro, like that's the thing, isn't it? Like this is why the narrative that he was saying, he was talking to working class people about their working class grievances, industrialize the US, bring business. that is a reasonable request for the American public. I
Yeah.
fully understand why they're, and he was using in many ways what should have been like leftist speaking points in some aspects, and kind of completely twisting them over on their, like tipping them over and rephrasing it within like more right-wing nationalist kind of context. But that is a positive thing. That's why I keep telling people, like, there is a positive there, that with it, the fact that even that he was able to appeal to people with these sort of working class and class orientated, I guess, speaking points. This means that the American public, if spoken to correctly, even people who voted for him can be taken in a certain direction. Because like that's what it says to me. I could be wrong, but that's sort of my analysis of the situation anyway.
Yeah.
And like, I think it's a good thing that most Americans are like kind of done with with both the Republicans and the Democrats. I think there is an understanding right now that both parties are establishment, that they're serving the interests of the elite, and that the elite, at least the one thing, good things come out of the files, like, oh, we're run by pedophiles. Yeah, that's true. And a bunch of lunatics and sociopaths. Yeah, I would say it's true.
Yeah. I think the Epstein Files, if messaged correctly, are a good information tool. I will just say the shoot your local pedophile bumper sticker guys are real quiet right now because they were hoping it would just be the Dems, but that's not how it works, y'all.
I don't know what to tell you, man. I don't know what to tell you. But listen, I think there are good things. I think there are positive things that have come out from this. Hey, I don't know if it's just like
I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted, but I'm surprisingly hopeful right now.
Listen, I'm struggling to be hopeful. Logically speaking, yes, there are reasons for that, but there are, for me, the whole situation with Cuba and Venezuela is depressing me. I'm being honest. That I did not expect Venezuela, because they had absolutely no reason to capitulate.
Yeah, but Delcy Rodriguez is a political survivalist animal who just wants to be at the top. She started off as a like modest communications director, and now she's in charge of one of the most geostrategically important countries on earth.
Yeah, but like, honestly, this is not going to keep her in power, political animal or not. No, I think it's going to piss off a lot of people in Venezuela a lot. She just completely reversed all of Chavez's policies, all of them. The whole Chavista movement just gone flushed down the toilet, and the entire establishment along with them completely betrayed the Venezuelan people in a way that to me is unacceptable, because they had no reason to. I mean, you had all these intelligence reports that came out, and we had discussed it like last time, like when we did that episode. All these intelligence reports that were effectively saying, yeah, we don't have the military capability right now to go to a full-scale war with like fucking Venezuela. We can't do boots on the ground, so we're gonna have to, and the Chavista, the Chavista movement is popular, so we can't put any other political figure in power. So we're just gonna have to keep with what we have, rather than use this to their advantage. And sure, negotiate a deal if you want with the United States, because why not? Keep your options open. You do need to industrialize, right? Like if you want to enter a stage of socialism, you do need to industrialize to a certain point. But this wasn't even it. Like, I don't know if you saw, like, it was complete. All business, all oil being basically essentially privatized. They will run, choose, and pick how the oil industry will work. They will receive all the profits, and in some cases, special projects, they're going to give them the Venezuelan state's only going to get 15% royalties paid to them. That's peanuts for the sort of Venezuelan people. And because apparently the investment dispute settlement isn't enough, they set up their own. Independent, investment dispute settlement just for Venezuela and the corporations that invest. I mean, that's just a complete capital corporate takeover. And for what reason? That depressed me. And now the whole situation is going on with Cuba as well because of Venezuela. I don't know. Revolutionary optimism right here.
Yeah. Maybe you just need to take a nap,
Maybe I need to take a what?
Maybe we just need to take a nap.
Maybe it's a nap. Maybe I've been smoking a lot more than normal. So that's when, my revolutionary optimism has gone a bit down the shitter. But yeah, man, I don't know what to tell you. I do still think that it's in a war, you're going to win battles and lose some. and still like the like U.S. empire is still is still much weaker, but it still has its power. You know what I mean? And
Well,
that's sometimes
it has a lot of inertia behind it,
Mhm.
and I fundamentally can't bring myself to do like clickbaity like video titles about like U.S. empire on verge of collapse after Putin and Xi do blah 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 blah. It's like it's just not true. This is a marathon. Hopefully in our lifetime it will collapse. That would be tight.
I think honestly, I do think it will be in our lifetime because things are escalating very quickly. Because the decline is happening because it's reached that point now where like
everything just happens faster. It's like the
it's
information
happening
environment, globalization.
everything. Yeah, because it's because of technology, but also because of the I've said every time there's been a crisis in the last 20 or 30 years, you'll notice that every crisis starts from a higher point. That's because the crisis never gets resolved. They just kind of patch over it with shit like I was talking about today.
Yeah.
But it's like a bubble that's going to implode, and they can't sustain being the dollar. They can't sustain being the dollar dominated. Having the dollar as the global reserve currency anymore. They don't really have the military capacity. They don't even have the industrial base to have the military power they once had. There's so many issues with the U.S. financial capitalist system at the moment that it's going to implode, and it's happening faster and faster because it's like a bubble. Sure, at one point it looks like it's inflating, but it doesn't look like it's going to implode anytime soon. But right now, it is, and so that's why I actually do think it's going to be in our lifetime. But like in the next decade or so, a lot of I think that I did watch you on Danny, for example. I know you have a more reserved opinion on Iran, but I do think that they're going to hit Iran, and they're going to systematically try to keep hitting Iran every now and then in like these short, quick, fast operations, like fuck some shit up infrastructure wise, basically destroy the economy.
I mean, they should just do it through proxies like the Mech, out of Albania or something. Like actually striking Iran.
They're already doing that.
I know.
They're already doing that anyway.
They should just expand the program, like from an imperial perspective. But like, they missed their window of opportunity for this round. I think they're going to have to wait for another one to happen.
No,
maybe I'm a little rosy about it. I guess.
No,
I just have to like. Maybe I still have some deconditioning to do because of like my military indoctrination, because it just makes no sense from a military perspective.
It doesn't make sense. But that's the thing. You're thinking about it from a military intelligence perspective. Okay, this is the rational thing to do. These are our resources. These are our capabilities. These are the conditions. We cannot go into this. This doesn't make any sense. Yeah, but when you're thinking about it from a capitalist perspective, and like and the people who are really calling the shots, because at the end of it, as the military is really the muscle of
the enforcement arm of capital.
Yeah.
Overseas.
They follow orders, and it doesn't matter. It's like you're thinking about it using the logic, the training that you've received. They're like, well, this doesn't make any sense. But then actually, when you think about it from a capitalist perspective, they don't have that kind of time. This is why they're ramping up. Like, they're not going to take the whole armada there and be like, okay, yeah, we're not going to do anything in bounds. They will target them, but it's going to be short term. It's going to be I read that piece back in July last year that basically said, mowing the lawn in Iran, I knew exactly they're going to be strategically hitting every. Like, that's what they're going to try to do. Internal operations, that goes without question. Mm-hmm. To destabilize. I mean, did you see they destroyed hospitals, schools, banks? That's going to cost the state that's already facing massive sanctions. Where are they going to get this money from?
They killed a bunch of firefighters. Who kills firefighters? Like, what the fuck?
They burnt one alive. There was one video where they burned the man alive. And somehow, if you have these conversations, you're just like, you're not standing with the people of Iran. I don't understand how that's helping the people of Iran. Why are you killing firefighters? Why are you destroying their hospitals, their schools, the emergency services?
Could you imagine what would happen in the United States if like people, like protesters, killed 300 ICE officers?
Oh,
like, could you imagine what would happen?
And setting ablaze
firefighters
and burning schools and hospitals.
Yeah.
No, could you imagine?
There'd be martial law plus like a 1980s style satanic panic going around.
Satanic panic. That's actually very accurate.
Yeah, it's like the devils come home to roost. Yeah. And then Peter Thiel's like, I am here to save you from the leftist antichrist. And it would be absolutely
that's
good show.
It would turn to whole. That would be the premise for an entire civil war, straight up. No, all hands to the fucking guns. Everything's happening. It's gonna go down because it's insanity. Like the amount. Yeah, they killed. Yeah, they killed. I think wasn't it more than 300 IRGC soldiers?
That's the
soldiers,
last.
personnel.
That's the last figure I saw.
It's nuts. But for me, it was more so like how people can justify destroying hospitals, kids' schools, bank. Like how is that for?
I mean, I get the bank. I get people not understanding why there was like
no, when you're
like,
in Iran where they're already struggling, what's the point of going after the damn banks? Like that's not going to make things any better.
I mean, one of the big red flags was like burning hospitals. Everybody needs that's shit in your community that you need. I would never think as an act of protest to burn down hospitals.
It's almost like they're trying to prepare for war to get rid of all the emergency services that could actually help people in those situations.
Well, you know, it is textbook terrorism because like what is the point? Like terrorism is generally when it's done as, you know, actually done, not like, you know, we get accused of, but actually done. It is to cause fear, destroy government institutional things that to make people not trust the government or that the government can provide for them or protect them. So now they have to like, you know, they're in this in-between status, choosing between the terrorist, like being sympathetic with the terrorist cause or the government. Like that's the basis of terrorism is to destroy institutions or faith in institutions so that people lose faith and legitimacy in the actual government. So kind of looks like burning down hospitals falls into that category.
It's exactly that. And that's exactly what it is. I saw something like it was like 2.5 million. What was it? Like destruction in just emergency services alone for Iran. And like they're already still trying to, you know, deal with what happened during the 12-day war. I mean, that was obviously destructive as well, on top of everything else. So you've got internal destruction, 12-day war, and you know, that's the other thing. I don't think anybody understands when we say sanctions. I don't think it's a word that people throw around without understanding like the implications on that. Did you know? I actually brought up in like one of the other episodes I've done somewhere. I was like, did you know actually before 2018, before like Trump pulled out of the nuclear deal, that Iran actually came close to establishing universal healthcare? Like this is by the Lancet report. It's like it was one of the first countries that almost came close to establishing like proper universal healthcare in the region, and it got instantly destroyed. Like and that was when Trump pulled out. These sanctions now, though, these multilateral sanctions, they are so incredibly brutal. I mean, basically locking 193 countries, throwing them out of SWIFT, cutting them their oil, you know, putting oil embargo, arms embargo, food, you name it. Like they can't trade, and they have to go back to these old, you know, roots of you know, black markets, and which creates an exploitative kind of relationship between Iran and the rest of the world, as in Iran becomes severely exploited, and then even more so between, you know, I guess the ruling class there and its own people. It's barbaric, and I feel like that's what they're going to do. I think they might strike, but they'll do like these very precision strikes so that Iran then isn't justified to retaliate. And then they're going to keep doing this until Iran is, they think they're going to try and break the morale. And I was reading this policy paper, they also working inside of Iran, they want to encourage the sectarian communities there, like the Kurds, the Azeris, etc. So maybe like balkanizing Iran. That's another objective that they have.
Well, this is what I wasted way too much energy, like engaging with Zionist monarchists. You know, I was like, look, if they really wanted to do like a CIA regime change operation, you'd have Reza Pahlavi, the Clown Prince, establish a government in exile, write a new constitution, and just get prepared to like be put in there. That's not happening. He's not capable of it, and they don't want him to do that. You know, the plan, and I've been talking about this for a minute, is to balkanize Iran along sectarian and tribal lines and turn it into a bunch of like resource fiefdoms that we can control and pit against each other. Like
they just want another Syria.
Yeah, because guess what? when Israeli intelligence officials get on Ynet News or the Times of Israel and say this shit out loud, I tend to believe them.
I know, right? I don't understand. That's another thing that's kind of driven me a bit nuts with the whole situation with Iran. You've got like these, American politicians. You've got Mike Pompeo. You've got like, especially the Israelis coming out on Hebrew media, and they're just openly making these statements on like I-24 News, etc. And about like how they're working inside of Iran, how they're the ones that are basically pushing for the rioters, they're funding them, they're arming them.
We're giving the protesters guns, and then 2 days later, there's 300 dead cops. Huh. And then the government
like what the fuck?
down. Huh.
Like, and then these things are happening broad, that like they're saying it, and then you still, when you try to bring this up in an argument, it's like, oh, you're just an apologist. Apologist for what? These are the facts. Like, I don't understand what you want me to say. This is not, I'm sure there are grievances, et cetera, but when you have an entire, like media campaign, and even Trump, he came out and said, when was it, a couple of weeks ago, that he's approving psyops inside of Iran and all these other things. They're functioning inside of Iran. There's so much Israeli and American intelligence basically free flowing inside of Iran, and they're not doing a good enough job to deal with it.
Well, also Iran has like one of the most unsecurable borders on the planet with Iraq too.
That's true. It's true. So this is a big problem for them. And like, but like when you try to bring these things up, like, oh, you're just an apologist. It's like, well, we're not, again, this is the thing. With critical thinking and, looking at like a materialist analysis of things, just people don't like it. And they're like, oh, you're just theoretical. It's like, no, bro, you're theoretical. Like nobody's more ideological than you telling me like, you can both support the people of Iran, but you don't have to like, and be anti-imperialist. I'm like, you're not making any sense. You have, first and foremost, you have to be anti-imperialist first to give the Iranian people the ability to be sovereign and away from imperial violence, and then let them dictate their future, free from foreign influence and persuasion and anything that's forceful.
And that is the difference between a popular people's revolution and a color revolution. Like,
that is
stop conflating the two, you weirdos.
No, it's true. It's true. You can't like, oh man, you can't complain about like, oh yeah, they're repressive, et cetera, like they're a militarized repressive state. Well, yeah, it had to become a repressive military state in part as well, because that was the only way to preserve the Islamic Republic after the revolution. I mean, it's actually, you can't complain about these things and then not look at the fact that sanctions, war, and imperialist aggression reinforces them by like tenfold. Like I've often said, if there was no sanctions warfare and Iran was left to its own devices, it would have been really interesting to see where Iran would have developed. Because like, when they talk about women's rights, et cetera, most women's, within 2 years, academia had basically been kind of overtaken by, by women who were basically dominating academia, universities. They were becoming doctors or nurses in the educated class. This was actually a reaction to the fact that because of the Islamic Republic and all this conservative nature behind it, they needed women to become educated, to teach other women, to, treat women in hospitals, et cetera, et cetera. But now what do you have? You have a massive, enormous educated female population that most likely had this, the sanctions not existed, would have advocated, become more organized with their educated background now and being a productive force of the economy. They would have probably pushed against the theocracy. Anyway, like I think the theocracy wouldn't have lasted nowhere near as long had the sanctions never occurred. Like if the natural process, and like they were allowed to develop their own productive forces, whereas like right now Iran is like a rentier state. It's insane. You can't have these conversations and not understand how sanctions literally creates these conditions. It's just, I don't even understand.
They don't want to hear sanctions. I don't
want to hear sanctions.
The only ex I ever talked to was like part of the Venezuela diaspora, and like the I mean, we're still friends, but like the level of conversation is just like, I don't know, I just kind of want to give myself a lobotomy. It's just like, I don't want to hear about sanctions. We know that the US wants the oil, okay, but Iran and Russia and China also want the oil too. I was just like, I can't.
What?
I can't with diaspora people who champion U.S. intervention in their country, because it's the more people I talk to with these positions just don't know basic facts. And it's like, listen to Iranians, listen to Venezuelans. I mean, I do my due diligence, and I talk to people in Iran, and I talk to people in Venezuela. And guess what? Just because you're from there doesn't mean you know what's going on. I'm not about to ask a frigging MAGA extremist about how the U.S. government works. Like, what the fuck is that?
Do you know what's funny? Do you know what's really ridiculous about that is when I hear that argument, like, I'm Iranian or I'm Venezuela, boo-boo. That was literally what the Israelis were saying after October 7th, when everybody was sort of fucking ramming into like Israel and like all their crimes. They're like, you're not even from here. You don't know what we go through. You don't know what the Palestinians are. You could like, it was the same argument. I mean, one could argue like, yeah, okay, you're in America. You don't know what you know, the poor Israelis and their lived experiences are in their head. They're the absolute victims. If you don't actually contextualize things with factual, historical, materialist analysis, your personal opinions and affiliations and sentiments can be driven in whatever direction. You always need to contextualize this shit. It's nuts to me. MAGA supporters.
The anchor of my geopolitical positions are based solely in Kamala Harris vibes. Vibes-based policy analysis.
Headquarters 6-7. Headquarters 6-7.
Oh yeah,
that was the highlight of my. Do you know? I feel like we should have put that on the episode. It was a shame.
Well, look, all the patrons are getting this. So let's sign off after Headquarters 6-7.
Good way to sign off.
Headquarters 6-7. Then we can find out what we're gonna call this episode. All right, y'all. If you're still around, let's do stop sharing. We're gonna share the screen. So one last treat at the 2-hour mark. If you go onto the account that just launched, it's called Headquarters 6-7. This is wait. What the hell happened?
Oh, did we lose?
Wait. Okay, wait. Someone just did. Okay, where? Okay, here. Yes. Okay. So originally it was called Headquarters 6-7. This is Kamala Harris's new like media platform, a Gen Z led progressive content hub. They called it Headquarters 6-7. And if you don't know, what does 6-7 stand for?
I actually don't know.
Okay. So 6-7 is a versatile term, most notably a recent ambiguous internet slang term from Generation Alpha. This is not even a Gen Z thing, meaning so-so or nonsensical. Meaningless, nonsensical, often used to describe something vague, unremarkable, or as a nonsensical response. It was the most used term last year, and the fact that you call your headquarters 6-7, which means nonsensical, vague, and ambiguous, could not be more on the head for Kamala Harris's policy positions on everything. It's literally insane. Like, how is this our timeline? 6-7,
and it's not even for Gen Z. Apparently, it's Gen Alpha, which is true. It's true. So, like, she's even got the generation wrong. Like, she used Headquarters 6-7 for a Gen Z oriented. It's like it's not even something that Gen Zs use. Yeah, but either way,
that's like a big high school thing. Like all the high school kids are talking about.
Yeah,
is Gen Z in high school anymore?
No, I don't think so. Oh God, when does Gen Z start?
We're so old. We're all mid-30s.
We're too millennial. We're too millennial for this shit.
Okay,
I have no idea. Wait, hold on. Yeah, we need to. Are you
Gen
checking or
Z
should I check?
Age range 14 to 29. Okay,
so they're
Gen Z, cool. Gen A. All right.
Okay, fine.
Look,
we'll let that slide.
Hello, fellow kids.
Hello, kids.
We're down.
No clue.
We're down here on Colonial Outcasts. We're cool.
Oh God, don't say that. What are you trying to say? We're down. What is now? You sound like a damn boomer.
We're down.
We're millennials,
kids,
for God's
y'all.
sakes.
Yeah.
Oh wow, I don't even know if we can collaborate anymore after that. Like our level of cringe is too much. I'm gonna have to rethink our relationships. I don't even want to be friends.
What? Sorry, like I'm trying to be hip and happen, and I can't let you hold me back.
Oh God. Oh God.
All right,
Oh God.
maybe we should end this and come up with a title.
Yes.
For this episode. All right,
Yeah,
cheers,
we
y'all.
should.
See you next week.
Oh God.
With
Yes.
the kids. Bye.